All right, we are live on Hopin. It is 9 a.m. Pacific time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm Matt Newberg. I'm the founder of HNGRY. HNGRY is a new media company that is exploring the impact of technology on the way we eat. Founded about in 2019 and cover everything from ghost kitchens to online grocery, and now very excited to really dive into the personalized nutrition revolution, which I personally believe shares like a lot of similarities with the homebrew computing movement and what that did for the personal computer. I think we're going to go through this revolution of what technology can offer us in the realm of our health and what we eat. So I'm very excited to be here today with you, with all these amazing panelists who I'll introduce very shortly. Um, I guess I just kind of wanted to start by giving you a little history into how I got started in the space about a year ago. So like historically had done 23andMe, which is a genetics testing company, which everyone knows is going public very soon via SPAC, very hot right now. And I think didn't really learn a lot about myself. And I think about a year ago, I realized that that's because our DNA, everyone in this room right now shares about 99.9% of the same human DNA, but we only share about 10% of the same gut bacteria. And we can actually change the composition of our gut through our diet and lifestyle. So if you have some bad gene, if 23andMe is going to tell you that you're going to get Alzheimer's, well, what are you going to do about it? And so what's really empowering about this revolution is that we have the ability as humans to leverage technology to shape our destiny. And that is super empowering. Um, I kind of started with a company called Day Two, which was doing a stool test where you would basically be able to get a set of personalized recommendations about what you should be eating, and which I found very fascinating. Not just because it was a stool test, but because for the first time there was some real actionable, uh, sort of insight into what works for me and what is the right diet for me. And so I started kind of peeling back the layers of this onion and trying to understand what was enabling all this technology coming to market. And spoke to a biohacker who is probably here today. His name is Richard Sprague. He's done over 600 of these tests himself. So, shout out to Richard. And he's like, hey, Matt, have you tried a CGM? They're about $70 and you can buy them. You just need a prescription from your doctor. So I called my doctor. I said, I'm not diabetic, but I want to try one of these blood glucose monitors. And I had no idea what I was doing. I basically was using this Google Doc that that Richard sent me, and he said, put the sensor on, start logging all your food, and see what this does. And I was just completely on my own trying to make sense of this. And then I came across a Pete in Clear Health from a friend of mine in Amsterdam who's actually in our video. And I was like, oh wow, maybe these guys can help me figure this out. And he created a metabolic program based in the Netherlands to help people figure out what is the right diet for them. And then this really hot company called Levels came about, and I kept saying, oh, this like invite only thing. And I reached out to Casey. I said, hey, can you hook me up with one of these? I already have a sensor. Started doing this. So I spent about over a month playing around with all these different companies and decided that, a big part of HNGRY is video. So we basically spent about 8 months, my director and myself, interviewing subjects here like Pete and Casey, and really diving into what this all means. So you can check that video out. It's in the bio here. It's on YouTube if you just search for HNGRY, or you can go to my website, hngry.tv. HNGRY is a multimedia company, so we're covering everything from articles and podcasts to videos like Welcome to Biodome, which covers this revolution. So that sets the stage for HNGRY. But thank you all for taking an hour out of your day to learn about this topic, and thank you for our panelists. I'd love to go through and have everyone introduce themselves. So I guess let's start with Dan. Dan, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm great, thanks. About a mile up the street from you here.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the new consumer and your journey with wearables?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Dan Fromer. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of a publication newsletter membership group called The New Consumer. My background is 15 years in business and technology journalism. Most recently, I was the editor-in-chief of Recode, which is part of Vox Media. And before that, helped start Business Insider, which I assume you've heard of, I hope. But more recently, in 2019, founded The New Consumer as a way to explore this intersection, this collision of the consumer world and technology, which had long fascinated me, starting with e-commerce, but going through things like personalized nutrition and how people might use something like that to prolong their health, make more money, live a better life. And as of this morning, I've also been testing the level system for 2 weeks now. So have some interesting firsthand experience as well. Newconsumer.com is where you'll find me. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely subscribe to Dan. Jack, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here. So I'll introduce myself. I'm a professor of pediatrics, strangely oceanography, but don't let that frighten you, at the University of California, San Diego. My primary research is in microbiome. We do a lot of an analysis of how microbial communities in our bodies affect our health and disease. And I'm also on the scientific advisory board for Day 2 and a number of other companies in that space. So yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, and love what you're doing with the American Gut Project. Pete, love to kick it off with you as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. A warm hello from Amsterdam, where it's actually night. My name is Pete, and I'm the founder and CEO of Clear.bio. We are a company that specializes in precision nutrition, and we ingest data from continuous blood sugar devices, and we help people to be the healthiest version of themselves by giving them actually daily smart dietary recommendations. So we are like this smart app in between this sensor, if you want, or smartwatch soon, and anything you need to eat on any time of the day. I have a PhD in chemistry and physics. I started my career at Unilever, which is a funny small anecdote because I started my career in functional foods 20 years ago. That's where we designed foods that were healthy for big populations. And when we hit 30%, 40% of, of people that it actually worked well for, it was a fantastic invention or a fantastic new food ingredient. Well, now we are 20 years down the line, and we have much more knowledge and data. So now we want to hit 80 to 90% accuracy with our recommendations. And that's why I'm here. I'm a data entrepreneur. I love to build these businesses, and this is a business that has the potential to improve the lives of many. So thanks for having me, Matt.
That's an amazing stat that blew me away the first time you told me about that 30%. If it works for 30%, then it checks the boxes, and it's really stuck with me.
It did, yes, but not anymore.
Yeah, thanks for for staying up late to talk with us. And last but not least, Casey Means from Levels.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Matt. So I'm Casey Means. I'm a medical doctor, and I am the co-founder and chief medical officer of Levels, which you've heard a little bit about from Dan and Matt so far. So what Levels does is close the loop between how our nutrition and lifestyle choices are affecting our health in real time. We do this by leveraging continuous glucose monitoring, and our software transforms the continuous glucose data stream into actionable insights to promote healthy behavior change that's personalized and sustainable. So I trained initially as a head and neck surgeon, and when I was in the hospital and working deep in the clinics, really was struck by how really the biggest epidemic of our time right now globally is metabolic dysfunction, potentially up to 88% of American adults having at least one biomarker of metabolic dysfunction. And I really shifted gears from focusing on this very niche area of the body, the ear, nose, and throat, to really try and attack what I thought was really the monumental problem we're seeing in our country right now, and to do that by empowering individuals with their personal data. So really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Awesome. Well, that's a great segue to kind of where I wanted to set the stage. And I would love if you could talk about metabolic health, and more specifically, why glucose is the key biomarker to unlocking longevity, and why, if we focus on that, it can unlock so much other benefits for our overall well-being and health.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So metabolism is really all the chemical reactions that are happening in our body that transform sort of food substrates into energy that our body can actually use. We need to be able to transform food, primarily glucose and fat, into a currency that our cells can actually utilize. In the case of glucose, that's glucose coming out of the bloodstream into the cells and transforming into ATP, which again is this currency that all our cells use. And why metabolic health is just so fundamental for overall health is because we have, more than 30 trillion cells in the body, and every single one needs energy to function properly. And if it doesn't process energy properly, you're going to see cellular dysfunction, which means you're going to see tissue dysfunction, and you're going to see symptoms and disease. It's so core and fundamental. And it's really easy to get these nuanced cellular processes going off course with making dietary and lifestyle choices that essentially hijack the system and make it gummed up and not functional. And that's really what we're seeing with the Western diet and lifestyle, is that it really co-opts these processes and makes them dysfunctional. And metabolic dysfunction can just have sort of infinite faces, because wherever this is showing up in the body, whatever cell type it's sort of appearing in, it can be a symptom. If it's in the ovaries, it could look like polycystic ovarian syndrome, the leading cause of infertility in the US. If it's happening in the brain, it could look like Alzheimer's dementia, which is now being called type 3 diabetes, or it could look like chronic pain or chronic fatigue or depression and anxiety. If it's happening in the liver, it could look like fatty liver disease. If it's happening in the vessels, it could look like vascular dysfunction of many types, retinopathy, erectile dysfunction, heart disease. So it's just got so many faces. But when we really step back, we're talking about core fundamental pathways and the trunk of the tree of so many disparate symptoms and conditions. We're seeing seemingly disparate conditions we're seeing in healthcare these days, particularly in the United States, actually are foundationally really linked by similar pathways. And that pathway really is metabolic dysfunction. So glucose is just a fantastic biomarker to orient our diet and our lifestyle around, because glucose is really this foundational unit of energy in the body. And when we essentially expose our body to too much exogenous glucose day in and day out, over and over, it creates this biochemical cascade, insulin secretion, and ultimately potentially insulin resistance, where the body gets numb to the effects of insulin, that creates glucose instability and variability in the body. And glucose levels go out of the range they're really supposed to be in. And this can cause a lot of these downstream problems that we're seeing. And just sort of an interesting statistic, we're about 150 years ago, the average American was eating about 1 pound or less of refined sugar per year. We're now eating on average 152 pounds of refined sugar per year. It's just monumental what the body has to process. You can see how easily that could really throw the machinery of the cells off. And that's just refined sugar. That's not even talking about refined grains and carbohydrates, which make up over 60% of the calories we consume in the United States. It's just really taking over our ability to process things efficiently. And that energy management problem is showing up as so many different chronic conditions. And actually 9 of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States are in some way contributed to by dysregulated blood sugar. Wow. So that's why I think it's so important to focus on. And aside from just preventing these long-term chronic issues, things like stroke and Alzheimer's disease and liver disease and heart disease and diabetes and obesity, controlling your glucose actually can make you feel good right now. It can make you feel more, if your glucose is in more of a stable and healthy range, as opposed to up, down, peaks and valleys, when you kind of smooth that out and keep it a little bit more stable, it not only for the long term is going to help you maintain that insulin sensitivity and hopefully avoid some of those downstream issues, but right now that's going to make you feel more stable energetically. It may make you able to have a little bit more oomph during your workout, have more, mental clarity, alertness, et cetera, and mood. So it's really at the nexus of current performance and then avoidance of future disease.
Wow, I love that tree trunk analogy. Might have to steal that from you. But, yeah, it is so fundamental. And I'd love to dive in with Jack, who's our resident gut microbiome expert, to just understand, the food component of this and our guts and how that is tied to glucose and why this is so important.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I love Casey's you're painting the picture of the body being assaulted by food, and that is essentially a component of what underlies, as you say, all metabolic disease and virtually every other disease that we come across, including behavioral and mental health disorders, other neurological disorders, and endocrine disorders. So from our perspective, those 30 trillion human cells are accompanied by about 39 trillion bacterial cells, the vast majority of which are in the gut. And the way that those bacteria interact with each other and interact with your diet especially plays out in nutrients and chemicals they release via their metabolism, which are taken up into the body and influence how human cells function and work. A great example of this is children who aren't getting enough protein early in life, right? Those children are responding to the lack of protein by actually catabolizing the muscle tissue in their body, so they don't grow. So you get shorter children who aren't getting enough protein. Also, their brains don't develop properly. And the triggering mechanism for the body sensing how much protein it's consuming in the diet is actually mediated in part by chemicals that bacteria release in the gut. And so with fantastic series of collaborators, we've understood that the types of bacteria that live in your intestine can change how your body responds to a deficiency of certain macronutrients, right? And so some children have the right kind of bacteria in their gut, and they can have zero consumption of protein and still grow and still have proper brain development. Other children are not so lucky. And when we find those little niche areas, it can play a fundamental role in helping us to figure out how to manipulate diet, how to manipulate lifestyle in order to trigger this mechanism that's inside our intestine to work more appropriately for our bodies. And so, you get to talk about glucose. Well, the glucose insensitivity, et cetera, that's the body's pancreas especially releasing insulin and releasing incretin, and that is in part mediated by bacteria living in the gut as well. So just like with protein sensitivity, insulin sensitivity can be altered by the types of chemicals that bacteria release from the intestine into the bloodstream, and they can affect the cells which release those hormones, right? And that can be fundamentally important. It can change the pattern of how you respond to sugar, how you respond to peaks and troughs, like we were hearing in the blood sugar. And so there's a huge amount of work on this over the last 8-9 years, showing that what you eat changes the types of bacteria that are in your intestine, and that changes the chemicals they release, which alters how your body responds to food generally, right? So we've been playing with this, and we talked about day 2 earlier, and I am on their scientific advisory board. But there was a fundamentally wonderful benchmark piece of research from the Weizmann Institute, Eran Elanav and Eran Segal, that demonstrated this very discrete relationship whereby the bacteria in your body could describe the vast majority of the variance in your blood sugar response to food, right? So what Casey is monitoring, there's a food goes in, we monitor blood sugar, but the black box in the middle, the bit in between those two pieces, is what kind of microbes you have present inside your intestine. And as you were alluding to, Matt, the opportunity to manipulate those microbes through diet, through lifestyle choices, through probiotics, prebiotics, whatever you want to do, is there. And if you can engineer the microbial community that's present inside you, you have the potential to flip the balance from an unhealthy community to one that's health promoting. And it can take time. It takes time and dedication, as all these things do. There's a great study that demonstrates that it will take approximately 9 months on your ideal diet to shift your microbiome from a disease-causing microbiome to a health-promoting microbiome, because it's an ecosystem, right? It's stubborn. You can't just burn it down and then replace it with another rainforest. You've got to manipulate the ecology. You've got to slowly shift it and change it, and that takes time. That takes pressure, and that's exactly what diets are. But it means sticking with those diets and getting and having that positive reinforcement to say this is working. So that's why I really appreciated what you were saying, Casey, and the fact that having that the short-term gains and feeling that positivity really helps to promote those lifestyle changes and dietary changes, which will then change the microbiome over time and put you into a more stable, more robust state in the future.
Gut plasticity.
Yeah.
Pete, I'd love for you to chat a little bit about how did we get to this point in time where we have Whole30 keto craze and these CPG companies who've been very hegemonic in telling us about what we should be eating and those trends, and then maybe starting to look at, well, given all this technology that we've kind of laid the groundwork for in this discussion, where this is going to be heading in the next decade or so.
Oh, wow. So we're talking about the future already. It's an interesting observation you have, Matt. In hindsight, I don't know how that works, for example, for Casey with levels, but in hindsight, it's very logical what our companies do. There is this great book from the Weizmann Institute that I have here. It's from 2015. There is this nice little sensor that produces continuous blood sugar, and we just apply what's out there. And apparently 2019 was a good year for that, because there are many companies founded in that year that actually started to apply this. My company started in a different way. We were very much fascinated by longevity. We realized that in science, the interventions are known to make you 200 years old. And we were so much fascinated by that we started to interview many people and health insurance companies, etc. And we actually found out that we didn't have a problem to solve. If people get 200 years old, we actually may create problems. I asked people, what do you do with these extra 100 years? And they said, we don't know. Perhaps watching Netflix. So while in hindsight, I just said that it's quite logical what we're doing. When I was starting Clear, it was not that logical, and it was more like a coincidence. So we were so fascinated by longevity that we were testing many hacks actually. So we were sleeping under sheets that didn't have any microcurrent, so they were how do you say that, grounded, no electricity, etc. All kind of hacks. And we also had this little sensor on the back of our arm, and we were working in a big community, and people were saying, what is it actually? And we said, well, it's just a sensor. You can buy it, and it says something about your food. And then these people bought it online. They came back to us and they said, hey, but how does it work now? I'm peaking on oatmeal. That's healthy. It can't be. So we said, well, we can explain, and perhaps you should manipulate. And actually, within a week, there were like 30, 40 people queued up at our desk. And then I said to my co-founder, hey, stop looking around. We have our product. We just build a service on top of this sensor, and we're open for business. Well, so this is, I'm not sure where I'm answering your question, Matt, but this is recent history. So let's look a bit ahead. My vision on this is that at a certain point in time, let me rephrase. So we in this call are very much convinced that this is the next pandemic. If I'm asking you guys how bad is it on sugar, on obesity, on Western welfare diseases, we all are very much concerned. But let's look at bigger populations. As soon as people understand that they need to work on their health, they don't have much choices at the moment. You know, they of course they can go exercising, work out. They can try a company like Levels or Clear. But the best thing people usually have is you know, follow a diet. And I have this little book here, which is actually one of the best books I know on a diet. This is from a general practitioner, and she knows what lifestyle medicine means. So she knows that what you eat is something that influences your general condition and may even replace on the longer term any drugs you need to take, etc. And I'm answering your question, and Matt, you're asking where is it going to? I think we're going to replace this book. Why is that? The first thing about this book is it looks fantastic. You know, there's oatmeal in it. Again, you know, there's quinoa, banana bread, etc. But one thing is really flawed about this book. We all in this call know that you can't prescribe a book to everybody because people respond personally to food. So before this call, we had a check-in with Dan, and he said, I cannot take any oatmeal, but it's on page 3, oatmeal, right? So this book is wrong for Dan. It may be the right one for Jack. We don't know. We have to find out. The second thing, which is a bit stupid about this book, or a book in general, is that it's not contextual, right? So contextual means that I want to have an advice what I should eat tonight. That is dependent on my calorie burn today, on my calorie intake today. It is dependent on my insulin sensitivity and my activity tonight. So I want to have a smart recommendation of things I've tested before. And the third thing about the book is that it doesn't become smarter if more people read it, right? We now have AI that usually becomes smarter when more people use it. So this is, for me, this is a last century thing. And if you ask me about the future, Matt, we're going to replace this by something we have in our pocket. This has the same or even more calculation power than the rocket that puts us on the moon. You know, let's use it not for putting people on the moon, but just for advising them what they should eat for breakfast.
Beautiful. Jack, you know, the gut has been referred to as our second brains. And there's all these links between gut and depression and mood, and all these in our skin. I guess my question is, how can we tailor this idea of food as medicine to solve for specific outcomes? And how much do we currently know today and where we are in time about what these axes are, and how much more progress needs to be made to understand those links? And what does that unlock?
Well, I'll give you a 3-hour lecture if you're not careful, if you ask me that many questions in a go. But it's complicated, right? So what we know is that bacteria, the vast majority of serotonin and GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, 2 major neurotransmitters in the body, are synthesized in the gut, right? Serotonin, bacteria produce serotonin precursors, chemicals which are used by the body to produce serotonin. And vast majority of that is produced in the gut. And the bacteria have synthesized GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, which helps regulate neurological pathways. And vast majority of that in the body is produced by bacteria in the intestine. And the body has all of these nerve endings, all innervated with our gut, right, that sense what's going on in there. And on those nerve endings are little receptors that listen to this chemical language being synthesized by the bacteria. And they send then messages up to the brain, which completely changes brain chemistry and alters behavior. Now, how do we know about this? Well, we've got an awful lot of work in mice and rats and some other animals where we've demonstrated that we can change behavior significantly by altering the types of bacteria and their chemical language inside the intestine. And we've shown that when we look at human beings, we can predict the kind of behavioral states like depression, anxiety, based upon the types of bacteria and their metabolic language in the gut, right? So we can see these relationships happening. And we know that food changes the bacteria, right? So it's axiomatic, it's obvious that if you alter food, you alter the bacteria, and therefore you can alter brain chemistry based on this chemical language relationship between the brain and the gut. And so what we've been really trying to explore is ways of manipulating that relationship. And so we formed a company called Holobiome, which is using bacteria we identified in human beings to manipulate brain chemistry by ingesting them, right? So like a probiotic against depression. And that comprehensively provides you with an opportunity. If you know which microbes to add back into the intestine to manipulate disease, then you can really play a fundamental role in speeding up that process. We talk about gut plasticity, taking 9 months to change a diet to alter an ecosystem. Well, if you know which bugs to add back in early on, you can speed up that transformation. We don't necessarily fundamentally understand exactly which bugs that is for, say, glucose insensitivity, but we are starting to see which bugs that could be for altering brain chemistry and altering depression and anxiety phenotypes. And a lot of that comes down to monitoring, right? Where we also spun out another company recently called BiomeSense, whereby much like the patches and monitors that you're putting on your skin and the back of your arms, Casey, for monitoring blood glucose, we're doing the same thing for poop, which is a lot less glamorous, but is pretty awesome in the fact that every time you produce a sample in the morning, that's a data dump, literally and figuratively, that we can capture and use that information to understand the flux and the flow and the dynamics of your microbiome over time. And so when we use that information, we track it over time, much like the blood glucose, we can see which bugs are active, which bugs are moving, what they're synthesizing, what chemistry they're producing, and use that information to predict your likelihood of developing a neuropsychotic episode like depression or anxiety, or a metabolic episode, or even an endocrinological or immunological episode, whereby you might be suffering inflammation or infection and disease. So that company, BiomeSense, is using this data stream that we all produce regularly and tying it back into metabolic disorders with blood glucose monitoring and other issues that allow us to really have a fine sensitivity in how the system is responding to change.
Awesome. Just as a quick follow-up to that, and I know I came across you through your connection to Sun Genomics. I'm one of the customers of Sun Genomics, which is a custom probiotics company. Could you just briefly explain, the difference between making these changes through food versus probiotics and prebiotics, and where you think that goes in the future and what those use cases are?
Yeah, I mean, so Sun Genomics is a local company spun out of UCSD, and I'm on the scientific advisory board for that company as well. And I rarely join. So I know I sound like I've been involved in a lot of companies, but there are 1,000 times more companies out there than I would want to be involved with. And this one is interesting, right? A lot of our evidence that we're generating in how to alter the behavior of the microbiome quickly is through prebiotics, so feeding the bacteria in the gut, right? So a great case in point of that is if you really want to drive down blood glucose rapidly, one of the good ways of doing that is just eat more fiber, right? The right kinds of fiber, a diverse aspect of fiber. Obviously, stop eating sugar and everything else and blood sugar, but improving the abundance of bacteria, which can help to modulate blood glucose responses, involves eating a lot of fiber. So those prebiotics, like fiber, are vitally important in helping to shape the microbial community in your intestine. And probiotics are a complicated one, right? The vast majority of probiotics have no necessary link to, say, maintaining health, but we do have evidence that some probiotics can be beneficial in helping to modulate disease. And so a combination of a prebiotic, which really drives the ecology of the bacteria which are already in your intestine, and a probiotic, which can stimulate immune responses and therefore change health in different ways, can be valuable. And so the background that Sun Genomics is generating is a large data set which allows us to really fine-tune those mechanisms, fine-tune which types of immune stimulation with probiotics you need, and which types of prebiotics could be valuable in helping to bolster the abundance of certain types of bugs in your gut. And the reason these data sets are important is because all of this is very early stage still, right? Like you talked about 23andMe not telling you very much. It does now. The more they get data, the more that data is valuable. And as Pete was saying, that data can be incredibly valuable in helping to shift our understanding of how much variance in responses we can describe in a population. And the same is true for companies like Sun Genomics, who are building up these databases to allow them to make more refined predictions of how people are going to respond to, say, prebiotic X versus prebiotic Z, right? And so that's fundamentally important if we're going to be able to make those precision statements about what people need in the future.
Got it. So I'd love to kick it over to Dan. The year is 2030. You've written a lot about, you've been very critical about the kind of 2.0 nature of online grocery shopping, I think, from my perspective. And I agree. What do you think the online, how can online grocery shopping become more personalized? And given your, early usage of product like Levels, what do you think that is going to look like in the future?
Yeah, how much time do you have? No. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the kind of unappreciated or underappreciated parts of the consumer response to the pandemic is that the percentage of people who shop for groceries online massively accelerated. It was, it was a very small percentage of the market for a long time. Driven most out of convenience. People who could afford to order groceries online for delivery did, but most people did not. Most people still don't, but a lot more do than they did before. And my kind of hypothesis, my line of thinking is that a lot of the behaviors that changed during the pandemic will become semi-permanent or permanent, even as things change, even as people start to feel more comfortable going into a store or, doing that Saturday afternoon retail walk. They're still going to be doing a lot of their grocery shopping online and either getting delivery or pickup. I don't think that's too controversial. The most interesting part of all this, though, is that shopping for groceries online is a fundamentally different experience than shopping for groceries in a store. That's better and worse. It's better because if you're a brand or a product, loyalty actually can be much stronger in an online grocery situation than in store. I worked on a big consumer trends report a few months ago with a venture capital firm that's based in New York, and part of that was doing a survey of 3,500 U.S. consumers in November after they had been shopping for groceries online, many of them for more than half a year. And one of the most interesting things that we found was more than 40% of our survey group starts their online grocery order with items from their previous order. So it's not even a blank slate. It's what have I been buying? And if you look at mine, it's a hilarious grid of like scallions, arugula, cottage cheese, things that I was eating sometimes before, but like really eating all the time now for whatever reason. But it's that experience stinks for discovery. It's really hard to get someone to notice a new product on a shelf or with snazzy packaging. The experience of browsing through a store or looking at our neighborhood grocer Erewhon has something like over 400 beverages on display in the cooler there. That just doesn't really happen online. So it's a totally different experience. However, this new user interface leaves so much opportunity for personalization. It's crazy. If you think about the structure of a physical store, everybody, sure, maybe you have your own path that you take through the grocery store, but everybody has access to the same stuff. The shelving is arranged the same no matter who you are in the store. But online, the shelving can be arranged in a way that's unique to you. And some of this is already starting to happen a little. You see Amazon especially rolling out things, and Instacart as well, that are based on your previous preferences. Some of them are targeted ads, which is how discovery tends to happen in online grocery. But it's not really plugging into too much. Even online restaurant ordering, only a few restaurant chains with their own apps allow me to input the fact that I have celiac disease and cannot eat any gluten. I have not seen that as a checkbox in an online grocery shopping system. Why not? And that's just a very, very basic thing. Things like gluten-free or vegan or vegetarian products. Now imagine if the same company that runs your online grocery application has either licensed or has a whole different product that samples your physical activity or your continuous glucose or your stool sampling biomarkers or whatever it is. There are so many opportunities for different parts of the algorithm to go in there and say, here's a bunch of stuff that we think is right for you to be ordering. Here's your personalized vision of the grocery store based on what we know you like, what we know you've consumed, and what we know you should be consuming. This takes us back to some of the same questions we've been asking for the past, 4 years and 3 months about Facebook. The algorithmic consumption of news is great for a lot of things, and it's terrible for a lot of other things like disinformation and misinformation. I'm very curious what sort of thinking they're doing inside of Whole Foods and Amazon and Instacart and Kroger and all these stores about the positive or negative benefits of algorithmic recommendations for groceries. Do they have the same ethical situation where they need to be thinking about, not only selling products, improving margins, promoting brands, but essentially promoting public health through consumption of better or worse foods? This is probably a sneak peek at a future article on one of our sites, Matt. If I don't do it, you might. But it's a real question, and
You should.
and then the other question is, what will people actually use of these features? Do people want to live a healthier life? I think from our research, they do. You see people taking very basic things like counting their steps with an Apple Watch. Apple Watch started off 5-6 years ago and now has millions and millions and millions of users around the world. So and that's just a very basic thing, which may or may not even have any impact on our lives. How many steps you do is 10,000 good or bad? Who knows? But I see interest there. I've been paying more attention to it probably than most, but because I've been testing the Levels program for the last couple of weeks, I've noticed actually several people I follow on Twitter also talking about the Levels program, whether they're using it or not. For 6 months, I wore an Oura ring to test my sleep. I learned one thing, which is go to bed early. Okay, great. My mom probably told me that when I was 6 years old, but the data actually proved to me that I'm not going to make up that sleep in the morning. It's just not going to happen. So go to bed early. So the more people that can get access to tools like continuous glucose monitoring and see through data, oh, wow, sushi rolls, maybe not something I should be eating for lunch every day, but wow, I just had this meal of, this luxurious beef short rib with a nice sauce and a non-trivial amount of polenta, and my blood sugar is totally fine. So, I might make those decisions differently in the future based on data and simple visualization. So the continuous monitor is probably more invasive than most people are prepared for. I wasn't sure what I was looking at when I saw a needle. It reminded me of the theft prevention devices in the fitting room of your local Old Navy or something like that. It doesn't hurt, so don't be afraid of that. There's no blood. But it is more than I think the vast majority of people will be interested in signing up for. But it's early. It's super early. It's 2021. Soon these things are going to be built, hopefully, into our AirPods or other types of devices that may not be the medically accurate, precise measurement that a diabetic needs. But if it can be, half as good or 75% as good for 1,000 or 1,000,000 times more people, I think that will actually make a lot of progress in society and in kind of training behavior. Most people still only think of nutrition as that pyramid that tells you to eat a bunch of pasta. So it's the beginning now, but I think between the tools that are going to be available and the general societal interest in living a better life and being healthier, and perhaps the extensions of this data that could be used to help you decide what to eat in real time on a personalized basis, I think there's something really exciting here, and I'm really eager to see it progress over the years.
Amazing. Thank you for that insight. And I think I really like what you said about like the kind of gradient of what consumers are willing to accept, and how accurate that data is going to be as far as, I personally believe that Apple will actually leverage the sensor that it recently put into its Apple Watch, the nanometer, to actually estimate your blood glucose levels. There's a number of spidey sense things I feel that this is coming. So I definitely think that there's going to be a less precise version of this for sure. I'd love to kick it back to Casey, and so when we first spoke, I think last summer, you told me to check out the CNN article. It was like an op-ed from Bill Frist. And one of the things that was mentioned in that article, which I thought was really great, was this idea that we have these two systems. Like Dan just described the food system, right? We have CPG brands and we have grocers, and we can link that all to the CGM. But then we have this healthcare system, which just doesn't talk to our food system, right? So we have these two disparate systems. I guess the question is, how are they going to start to talk to each other, and what sort of incentives can we create across both of them, and what might that look like in the future?
Yeah, so it's an important question, because I think a lot of the reason we've gotten to the place where we're at right now with this massive epidemic of metabolic conditions has a lot to do with what you're talking about, especially in terms of incentives. We have traditionally in the US been essentially a fee-for-service healthcare system, meaning that doctors get paid for essentially diagnosing someone and then doing something. So there's codes for diagnoses and there's codes for what you do to the patients, and you get paid when you bill those codes. And what that does psychologically to both patients and doctors is create a system in which things are only really real when you have a label for them, when you have this diagnosis. And that is, so you can imagine someone comes into your office with diabetes, obesity, heart disease, depression, prostate cancer, arthritis. And that's, 6 different discrete codes, different silos. And then each of those, you turn around and you prescribe a different medication for each of those things. And you get paid for that. That's not the reality of what's happening biologically in the body. In fact, those diseases are linked in many ways. All of those conditions I just mentioned in some way are related to metabolic dysfunction. Many of the conditions I just mentioned have the same upregulation of the same inflammatory cytokines, TNF-alpha, interleukin-6. You can't code for upregulation of TNF-alpha. You can't code for the word metabolic dysfunction or early insulin resistance. It doesn't exist. And something that's very interesting to me personally, just as a physician and scientist, is the concept of network and systems biology, which is the idea, a more new idea of you look at diseases in a network. What are the different links between conditions? How are they not separate, but similar? And how can we treat at that level? And proteomics and whole genome sequencing, these newer ways of looking at diseases, have allowed us to see those networks. And that's the way we really should be treating and approaching health. But that's a lot of times you're going to be treating in a preclinical state where you don't even have a code or a label necessarily. For instance, you can code for diabetes, but insulin resistance and elevation of insulin in the body, research suggests happens 13 years before blood sugar actually changes, flips into a clinical range. So we're missing these huge windows. And I don't think any of this is like intentional, like we're ignoring patients before they get sick. It's just built in and baked into the way that we have financed healthcare, the way we're taught healthcare, the bias towards action. We're a reactionary healthcare system. So I think that's part of why we've gotten here. There's good movement that's happening, I think, from the standpoint of how incentives will change practice. One of those is sort of this movement towards more of a value-based care system as opposed to a fee-for-service care system. And the value equation is outcomes over cost. You want good outcomes for low cost. And the reality is that prevention and nutrition and lifestyle interventions are relatively low cost and so good outcomes, relatively low cost. And And so it's gonna fit nicely. A nutrition perspective will fit nicely into a more of a value-based care system where doctors actually are getting reimbursed higher by systems like CMS and Medicare when they provide higher value care. That may shift things towards, oh man, if I can keep my patient out of getting a triple bypass, which is tens of thousands of dollars, by maybe keeping their blood sugar under control for 20 years, which is fairly low cost, CGMs are going to become increasing less expensive. That may emerge as a high value intervention. There's a number of other, and just one quick thing there, a really great example of this is Dean Ornish, who's a very prominent physician in the United States. He's at UCSF and has focused on reversal of heart disease through dietary and lifestyle changes. He focuses on a whole foods, largely plant-based diet for reversal of heart disease, and has actually shown regression of coronary plaques in the arteries, which were thought to be irreversible, through a 12-week program that is, I believe it's 12 weeks, but it's 72 hours of intensive dietary and lifestyle interventions. He's been doing research for 30 years, basically showing with invasive angiography that this reverses plaques. And in publishing the outcomes data and the methodology, and finally doing a cost analysis of this program compared to conventional care, it's now being covered by Medicare. It's one of the first programs to ever be covered by Medicare that's an intensive dietary and lifestyle program. So for anyone with advanced heart disease, they can actually sign up for this as an option. And it involves stress management, exercise, community, and diet. And what they showed basically was that over the course of 3 years, it could save $17,000 per patient. I believe over 3 years, it might have been per year compared to standard of care. So again, that's like nutrition fitting into a value-based type care system. There's a number of other factors that make this challenging, one of which is the policy around food in the United States, particularly with our farm bills. We unfortunately, we have this funny conundrum in the United States, which I think is very foundational to a lot of our problems, which is that the USDA, which makes our nutrition guidelines in the United States, actually their mission, and in their mission statement, is to reduce hunger in the United States and to support American agriculture. So the USDA, who makes our nutrition recommendations, is to minimize hunger and support farmers. It's not to improve human health. That is not in their mission statement. And what we see with the farm bills is that we spend over $30 billion subsidizing commodity crops in the United States, meaning that we support the prices of those for farmers. And those are things like soybeans, sugar, wheat, corn, over 80% of which for most of these are converted into refined products. It's not like this is corn that's going in to make some like stone ground corn tortillas or soybeans that people are eating. It's being turned into soybean oil. It's being turned into, refined wheat flour. And actually a huge percent of it is going to animal feed, which is going into the industrial animal complex, which creates crappy meat that's bad for human health. And so we're essentially, taxpayers are subsidizing billions and billions of dollars for commodity crops that are making us sick. We actually only spend $700 million in the United States on what are called specialty crop support, which is fruits, vegetables, and tree nuts, which are all shown to be disease reversing. They're not even actually labeled as a food. It's under the horticulture section of the Farm Bill. So it's a very strange system where we're basically supporting and propping up these crops that are hurting human health. And what I like people to kind of remember is like, we are actually as taxpayers paying like 4 times over for our food. We're paying for the taxpayer money for farm bills to support these crops. We're paying for the food, whatever white flour packaged food we're buying when we actually go to the store. We're paying for the healthcare costs of what the food is directly leading to: obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance. And we're paying for the environmental damage of these crops, because these crops are going to be the monocropped, glyphosate sprayed crops that are going to dump, off into the rivers and create these dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and are eroding our topsoil, et cetera, et cetera. This is not biodiversity farming. So if we actually took a pound of meat, a conventionally raised meat that we get at the grocery store that's fed corn and soy from subsidized, pesticide covered food, if that actually had a real price to it, that took it into account the healthcare costs, the environmental costs, the commodity crops, and the environmental damage, it would probably be like $100 a pound, but it's actually $5.99 because we're basically, taxpayers are paying for it 4 times. And so there's a lot of, we could go on, I could go on and on about it. I write a lot about this in opinion pieces and whatnot, but it's really important to remember that we are in a system that is not designed to support preventative health, and it's not designed to support healthy food. It's designed to treat disease once it's emerged, and it's designed to put cheap, really unhealthy food in your hands. So unless you are relatively hypervigilant about thinking through these things, having a totally different mindset around food and investment in food and your body, the default is you're on a treadmill towards sickness and towards these sort of inevitable diseases associated with our regular diet and lifestyle. So that's what excites me so much about personal data in response to personal data to understand nutrition, which we've never had before. We've had sleep trackers, we have activity trackers, we have, stress trackers, even heart rate variability, but we've never had a tracker for nutrition. And it really holds up a mirror to the reality. It cuts through anything related to nutrition wars. It cuts through anything related to marketing claims. This whole grain food is healthy for you. It's just data. It's real. And so no matter what's coming from the food pyramid, no matter what's coming from the doctor, you have your own data. And I think that's gonna transform when this becomes really mainstream and potentially even becomes something that's covered by insurance for preventative use. I think it's going to change consumer decision-making. I think it's going to change the way we think about food and what's being offered to us and marketed as healthy. And my hope is that that's going to create sort of more of a grassroots movement towards pushing for better options. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for all that. The 4 times over thing, I think that's going to definitely stick with me for a while. Every time I buy something.
I have to say, the person who first kind of got me thinking about that was Dr. Mark Hyman's. Yeah. He writes a great book called Food Fix, and he just came out with another book called Pegan Diet. But really awesome stuff in Food Fix about the systems issues related to food. And another great book on this is The Hacking of the American Mind by Dr. Robert Lustig, for sort of like the primer for anyone listening of this stuff.
We'll definitely send those out, and along with the archive. Someone was just asking about that. We're kind of running short on time, but I will run it a little bit over to just handle this one question, and I'd love Pete to chime in here. We got David De La Rosa asks, how may microbiome / genomic data affect how food producers label or produce food? For example, will CPG manufacturers highlight foods that are best able to address genomic profiles? And maybe we can talk about a little bit of what a genomic profile could be.
Wow, that's an all-in-one question, I think. What is fascinating about this meeting this morning is that we have the empirical approach. Let's try oatmeal and see how it works, and we have the scientific approach. Let's measure your poop, and let's tell you what you should eat. And I would love to have a few of these calls later this year, next year, to see how science and the predictive theory part comes together with the empirical part. Jack has perhaps 10,000 mice to experiment on. We have 10,000 people, people in the wild. So this must be fantastic, if we can work together on this. So I don't know if the origin is genomic or the poop sample of Jack or the empirical data of Levels or of Clear, but I'm very certain that there will at a certain point in time be a kind of a footprint which tells exactly what you should eat and should not eat, perhaps enhanced by some some DNA data about your allergies, etc. And I very much believe in the fact that this footprint will be owned by the individual, by the person, and not by the FMCG or the retail chain. And then it becomes interesting, because this footprint is really, really smart, right? You can scan labels. You just read the barcode and it says, hey, oatmeal, not good for you, Dan. And hey, avocado, it's really good for you, Jack. So this works like instantly, right? We don't need, let's say, producers to change their labels. We just need the barcodes, and we match it to the footprint, and it's a yay or nay. And in this, and when we do it like this, let's say the power of choice and the power of the data, as Casey just indicated, remains with the participants, with the consumer, right? And that's the good thing. So there's no doctor, no FMCG company, no retail store, or no food pyramid telling you what to eat. It's the data. Am I answering your question, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was okay. But I still think that Amazon is going to come in here, or they're already here, and then be able to roll everything up.
I mean, as Dan was saying earlier, right? All we then do is create companies that have algorithms that predict the types of food that we should eat based on the science. Hopefully, science will out, and there'll be competing companies and say, well, are my algorithms better at predicting what you should eat? And then that all ties into, well, that's commercial enterprise, right? And the free market system. So I think there has to be at some point some discussion on regulation, as Dan was discussing earlier.
For sure.
Dan, any final takeaways before we let everyone go back to their work from home days?
Like everything else, this all relies on companies working together, and that's hard. So, I wish you all luck getting this stuff out there, because it's, there's no one that can say, here's the blueprint for the perfect system that's going to make everyone healthier. It's going to be a super uphill challenge. And, even just getting Apple and Amazon to talk to each other is really hard. So I don't know. We'll see.
More case for vertical integration. Some monolithic tech company coming in and doing what Facebook did for the 2016 election to our health. Okay, we won't go there.
And interacting with the scientists, right? Getting scientists to talk to companies and actively provide data-based evidence to bring accountability back into the system, right? I actively engage with companies in order to ensure that what they're doing is fair to the consumer, rather than any other way around. And by doing that, I've called out companies that aren't and brought them down. And I think that's incredibly important to do.
Who are the ones we need to who should we be looking out for, and what are the good ones? Maybe.
Well, just if I put my name on it, I trust it.
Got it. Okay, so we'll definitely check. I'm a user of Sun Genomics. I can say that I have improved in some areas, and I've definitely regressed in other areas. As a constant moving target, I guess I have to wait 9 months. I've used Levels and Clear, both great products. My question is, when should I go back and use it again? How often am I going to be engaging with you guys? I'm assuming there's going to be a data layer of some sort that I will be able to start sharing with other companies, but we can save that for another article. But yeah, I'm super excited to watch everyone and how they go through their journeys here. And thank you all for taking the time, and thank you for the audience for making the time out of your busy schedules to listen to us today. All right, signing off.
Thanks,
So
Thank you.
We'll send an email to everyone as a follow-up with the archive. And if you have any questions, feel free to reply to that email, and I'll do my best to help out. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Take care, everyone.